I hope y'all had a chance to network and have some good conversations around data, where your organization is using data, how you're using data, and your expectations with regard to data. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our panel for today. We have Christy Uden, the Chief Executive Officer at Board of Certified Safety Professionals. Dr. Holly Zanville, Research Professor and Co-Director for the Program on Skills, Credentials, and Workforce Policy at the George Washington Institute of Public Policy, there at George Washington University. We have Vanessa Brown, Deputy Chief Data Officer for National Student Clearinghouse. And we have Karen Elzey, Associate Executive Director for WorkCred, who's going to be our moderator for today. So Karen, at this time, I will turn it over to you. And would you like to drive your slides?
Sure. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
That just might be.
Hit the share screen button, the green button.
Yep. Let me just pull up the presentation here. So thank you, everyone, as I'm pulling up the presentation. Editing, screen, and sorry, I'm having way too many things on my screen that are getting in the way.
For you to show it.
Yeah, here we go. Share screen. Can people see that?
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to have everyone here. We wanted to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing and also to really encourage all of you to join us in this really exciting journey around data. So just to give you a little bit.
Karen, I just want to interrupt for a second. Can you expand the slide view so that we see only the slide, not the notes on the side? Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So, let's just talk a little bit about the background and why we're doing this. We know from a recent report from Credential Engine that there are nearly 1 million unique credentials. And I think just to be clear on the call, when we're talking about credentials, we're talking about certifications, certificates, badges, degrees, micro-credentials, certificates of apprenticeship. So all of those things, we have nearly 1 million of them that consumers are needing to select from. There are more than 500,000 of those are what we consider non-degree credentials, and about 8,000 we think are certifications. So we know that individuals and employers are struggling to figure out which credential is right for them, what credential is appropriate for their job and to put in their job description. And yet at the same time, there is a great desire to understand what the return on investment is for people who get any type of credential, not just a certification, but also a degree. What happens to that person after they earn that credential? Do they earn a livable wage? What's the career pathway that they took to get there? And we have some of this information about degrees, but we have less of it about certification. And so we're really interested in being able to link different data sets to help us answer some basic questions, such as how does a credential help an individual get a job or advance in a career? Are there wage gains if you get a specific credential, or if you get multiple credentials, what are the wage gains? And are there differences in wage outcomes for men, women, or among different racial groups who hold the same credential? So we think that if we were able to link that data, we could gain insights into some of those questions. And so, at WorkCred, which is, for those of you who don't know, an affiliate of the American National Standards Institute, thanks to some funding from Lumina Foundation, we began a network 2 years ago to engage an array of certification bodies about the value of sharing their data. And we did that for several reasons. One, unlike with universities and colleges, there is not one complete centralized source of data about the outcomes or the impacts of certifications, and especially data that's from a third party. We know that there's continued confusion in the general public about what a certification is compared to a certificate or another type of credential, and we want to help address that misunderstanding. And then we really need to understand what happens to people as they get these certifications. And part of that is also to help the certification bodies engage in continuous quality improvement. That if we had better data, certification bodies could choose to make some changes into how their programs were run. So we worked with those certification bodies, and we've been meeting with them quarterly. And one of the things that we think is really critical to the certification bodies who have become part of the network is the need to really assess what their current resourcing and staff capabilities are to support an effort like this, to really understand, the technical capability, what type of data is your certification body currently collecting, how are you collecting it, in what format, and then maybe taking a look at also the policy, privacy, and security procedures that are that your certification body is already abiding by, and are there any changes that need to occur. We know that with the certification bodies that are participating with us, this is a voluntary activity. The whole focus was to really explore what it means to link data. And you can see from the slides, this is an example of certification bodies that have sent representatives to the meeting. The purpose of them coming to the meeting is to really better understand why there's a need to collect this data. We know that there have been isolated efforts to collect data by states, as well as self-reported data from certification bodies, but frequently that data is incomplete and sometimes fragmented. So all of these folks have agreed to come together to have this discussion, as well as the certification bodies listed on the second slide here. So you can see it covers a wide range of certification bodies, different levels of certifications, different industry sectors. As I said, these members have agreed to explore. There was no commitment that any certification body had to make. Certification bodies will need to make this decision on their own, based on their own experiences and what's happening within their own certification body. We do hold quarterly meetings. We've got one coming up next week on September 29th to discuss different aspects of the project, such as we did a survey to understand what type of data certification bodies are collecting, whether they would be willing to collect additional data information. We were specifically interested in things like race, ethnicity, gender, military status, and disability status. Why certification bodies have opted to collect some data and not other data, and what are the perceived challenges of collecting data and then sharing that data with a third party. Our anticipated outcomes are here on this slide. We hope that people will be more aware of different data-related projects, and that they'll understand the importance of collecting data and hopefully want to engage in further collection of data. And then we worked with the certification bodies and the National Student Clearinghouse to develop a value proposition. What's in it for the certification bodies to participate in an effort like this? And what will they get back in return? So we know that with any project, there's got to be some individual, what's in it for me? And we think we've been able to outline that, and Vanessa's going to talk a little bit more of that in a little bit. And then also for your information, WorkCred, we'll be releasing a series of issue briefs towards the end of the year on certificates and certifications, and what are they? We continue to see confusion among the general population and policymakers and others about what a certificate is versus what a certification is. Those terms continue to be misunderstood. And then also to help foundations and others understand organizations like the Certification Network Group. Frequently, we see that folks, are very clear about who convenes higher education, but they tend to not be as familiar with the fact that certification has its own community and that there are organizations that convene the certification bodies. And we want to make others more aware of what those organizations are and the role that they play in this work. Obviously, our aspirational outcome for this project is that we want certification bodies to enter into an agreement with the National Student Clearinghouse and to enter into that shared data linking agreement. We're excited to have Christy Uden with us today from the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. They are part of the network and have signed on with the National Student Clearinghouse, and Christy's really going to talk about the practical hands-on challenges and issues that the certification body had to address in order to get to the point to share their data, but also to discuss why a certification body would want to do that. This is just a quick slide. Vanessa will talk a little bit about this more in depth, but this is kind of an example of what we see as the value. On the left, you can see the 3 types of data. So this would be from the certification body. It would be industry credential information, so about your certification and about the individual who has taken that certification. From the National Student Clearinghouse, they would have educational outcome data. And then from the US Census Bureau, there would be aggregate labor market outcomes. And then on the right, you can see some of the examples of additional information and knowledge. And I think it was Matt Feger from Cobalt who talked about, actionable insights. And that's what we want to get from this type of information. We want new knowledge and new actionable insights that make a difference for individuals, for employers, for policymakers, and for the certification body. So you can see things that you would get from student level educational outcomes when you link that aggregate education outcomes and aggregate labor market outcomes all have very specific levels of information. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Vanessa Brown from the National Student Clearinghouse, who's going to talk about the data infrastructure that they're building and how this is, what some of the outcomes have been from the initial pilot. And then we'll go on and talk with Christy Uden about some practicalities and Holly Zanville to talk about some of the broader trends in credentials. So Vanessa, I'm going to turn it over to you. I will stop sharing.
Am I going to drive the slides now?
Oh, I can't. Do you want, or I can?
Yeah, if you can, it would be great.
Sure,
Instead
no
of us changing back and forth. So thank you, Karen. And yes, this project has been a labor of love in many ways. The National Association of Manufacturing reached out to the Clearinghouse about 4 years ago to really try and understand what was the connection between their manufacturing certifications and education attainment. And then they wanted to understand the labor market outcomes. So we developed a strategic partnership with them to create a process to bring in this manufacturing credential attainment data from 3 organizations: the American Welding Society, the Manufacturing Skills Standards Council, and the National Institute of Metalworking Skills. We built that industry credential intake process and tested it with them. At the same time, we were working with the Census Bureau to get a contract to look at the aggregate labor market outcomes. We signed that contract in August 2018, and the important part for us was to receive the approval to access the IRS data in January 2020. One of the reasons we believe that the Clearinghouse was able to do this is because we can actually provide a public benefit to the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau's education data today is mostly survey-based, and we actually have a near census coverage of enrollment and degree information. We can tell them the highest degree attained for well over 95% of individuals in the US. So since that time, we've been piloting and analyzing industry credential attainment labor market outcomes. We also, as Karen mentioned, we developed a strategic partnership with WorkCred because we needed to be closer to organizations that are part of the certification community and to understand how that we could work together to drive adoption of clearinghouse services. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. Oh, The good old disclaimer. Yeah, Karen slipped over the disclaimer, and that's fine. The Census Bureau, we are doing pilot information. Everything you have seen has gone through their disclosure review board process, but it hasn't been presented officially in a paper yet. So next slide. So these are the kind of aggregate labor market outcomes we've been able to produce out of the Census Bureau. To give you a sense of the data, we sent about 119,000 student level records to the Census Bureau. And that was about 330,000 certifications. So many of the people in that cohort had multiple certifications. The two organizations that we were able to really produce a lot of labor market outcomes for was NIMS and MSSC. This certification pathway outcome chart is based on the National Institute of Metalworking Skills. They currently have about 50 different certification programs, half of which fall into level 1, half of which fall into level 2. And then they have a couple that that are level 3, which means you're really becoming a master at metalworking. So we grouped them by level 1 and level 2, and the year 0 is the last credential award date when we're looking at the individual records, and we're looking at their wages 5 years prior to the credentials and 5 years after the credentials. This tells a great story for a certification body. It's telling you that you continue to see wage gains with level 1, but if you continue down that pathway and you go to level 2, you have substantial salary wage gains there. This is a great marketing opportunity in how to increase business for your second level certifications, and also really shows those pathways. This is a different example. This is the MSSC. They have 4 stackable credentials. People take safety, quality, production, and maintenance. If they take all 4, they can sit for and become a certified production technician. Again, it's showing you the same kind of pathway. Now, you're going to see some noise, like level 3 goes down a little bit, but some of that is because of the cohort size. But generally, the story here is stackable credentials continues to increase wages for individuals that are attaining these credentials. Next slide. Another really important level of analysis that we can do is looking at industry employment before and after the last credential. This was important, hugely important in manufacturing. There's this big talent gap. They're dying for workers, skilled workers. And what we saw here is there is a great opportunity. Before the credential was earned, there was 27% of the cohort that was working in manufacturing. That increased to 42% after the credentials were earned. So great growth in manufacturing employment. What's interesting when you start to get to this level of detail at the Census Bureau, we can drill down sometimes into the 3-digit NAICS codes, the North American Industrial Classification Code. And I know a lot of people are very interested in, okay, so what kind of settings are my certification holders? Are they working for big employers, small employers? How are they geographically dispersed? And we've been able to do some of that analysis as well. What's interesting in manufacturing, this little 12% administrative and support waste management bucket, apparently there are staffing firms in manufacturing, which I wasn't aware of until I did this project. But there are people in manufacturing in that bucket. So that's some of the interesting things that you get to look at when you're looking at Census Bureau data. Next slide. What was really interesting, and this is a big opportunity, and NAM is going to be doing some additional qualitative research in this area. We looked at, of all of the certification holders that got manufacturing certifications, we broke it down by male and female, who went into manufacturing and who did not. And you can see there is a very large wage gap here for the people that did and did not go into manufacturing. So why is that? NAM wants to explore, are the people that are sitting in community colleges getting these programs and being educated to take these certifications, are they aware of opportunities to be employed in manufacturing? Do they have opportunities to interview? Many of these certifications, you only require like a week or 2 program in a community college to get these very first entry-level certifications. So what's going on here? And is the incentive structure set up correctly? What are the incentives to get more people into manufacturing? But it's been really, that was a real big epiphany for NAM, and they are going to be doing further exploration to figure out what is causing this. The other thing that was really interesting to us, though, is that the people that didn't go into manufacturing still had an increase in salary. And why is that? Is it just the process of going to sit and take a certification that gives you some other skills that you are bringing to your job and getting a little bit of a wage bump? Next slide. We also looked at wages before and after certification by age. And one of the things that was really interesting on this slide to us is that 46 to 60 group started seeing stagnating wages. But just the process of getting an entry-level manufacturing certification, they could start to recover some of those wage losses. What you're seeing in the age 18 to 25 is what you would typically see. A lot of those people are in high school, and then they're getting a job, so their wages go up. But we really like the story around the stagnating wages and the ability to increase those wages. Obviously, this is a hugely important issue in the market we're in today, where we really need to upskill and reskill people to fill the talent needs in the labor market. Next slide. This is looking at that same chart that we looked at by gender, broken down by race and ethnicity, the people that are entering and not entering manufacturing. So you see the same gap here in the people that didn't go into manufacturing. So we believe there is a big opportunity here, again, to find out what's going on, to help with DEI initiatives in some of those fields. This is great data to take a look at and see, okay, we know we have this, now where do we go from, how do we improve these numbers and get more of these people to have higher wages and not leave all that salary on the table because they're not looking for jobs, or they're not applying for jobs, or not getting jobs in manufacturing. Next slide. This is the data elements needed for linking data, as Karen had talked about that a little earlier. This required minimum data is what you need to report to get started. And as you send more data to us, you'll get more matches and you'll get more data back. And when we talk about race, ethnicity data on the bottom, if you send that data to us, we can send you more of these reports broken down by race and ethnicity. But there is just really a very small level of data elements that are needed to start participating and seeing what those educational pathways look like with the clearinghouse's data, and then further to see the aggregate labor market outcomes. We have data birth here as an additional data element that supports finding more matches. We know a lot of certification bodies haven't collected data birth. There's a lot of privacy concerns around some of that data. That is a key element for matching, and it helps us match both at the clearinghouse and at the Census Bureau. But the clearinghouse is also doing some work to improve our matching. We have implemented a brand new matching tool that's going to help us enrich matching, even if we don't get data birth. But it is a critical element. And again, the point here is the more data you send us, the more data that you get back, and the more insights that you'll be able to get to drive your business. Next slide.
I think that's it for ethnicity. Other things to add, and then we're going to go to Christy, but I wanted to make sure. Is there anything else you wanted to?
No, I think it's good to go to Christy.
All right. So now it's, we're going to turn it over to Christy Uden from the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. I thought this would be really beneficial to all of you because she's one of your peers and can talk about how they got into this process and why they agreed to enter into an agreement with the National Student Clearinghouse. So Christy, it's all yours.
Oh, great. Thank you, Karen. So just a little bit about the history for those that weren't in the breakout group. I actually sit on the Work Cred Advisory Board. So that's how I found out about the National Student Clearinghouse. And so over time, as we started having those conversations and looking at what data we were currently capturing and what outcomes that would be helpful for us to make decisions as an organization, it seemed like a really great opportunity to get involved. So we sat down and we started looking through, okay, strategically, how could this help us? And yeah, I think the slides kind of demonstrate what Vanessa was showing, all of the data that we would get back in return, looking at that career trajectory, looking at the educational pathways and what pipelines are available when we look at the census data, the demographics. So we had to take a step back and find out, what are we currently collecting and how does that link to what NSC has, so we can make sure that there's, you know, data integrity and there's that conversion process. So as we started identifying data, we determined that we had enough data to at least start the preliminary, what Vanessa showed, like we had everything we needed that was required. So then we went to the middle to determine what else do we have that would be helpful to make sure that we're actually linking the proper candidate with their records. And so date of birth, fortunately, was something we do collect. So that was included. We had employment and contact data, emails and all of that. So everything in the second column there, we were already collecting. And then in the third column, which was the race, ethnicity, military status, and gender, we were not collecting. The only way we were able to identify gender is if they had chose like Mr., Ms. And so we've added those as optional on our application forms. So now we are beginning to collect that, which again will just help verify that we're linking to the appropriate person and give us more in return and in our findings when we get those reports back. So we first had to start, when we looked at the agreement, there was a lot of concern, and I'm sure most of credential bodies understand with accreditation, the privacy issues that revolve around that. And so we had to take a look at what are our policies and procedures, how do those map to accreditation standards, what's possible, what's not possible, and where's our data being stored at NSC, what are they doing with the data, what happens if there's a breach, what happens if we no longer, the contract terminates, how do we get out of the contract, where does our data go? All of those types of questions are things we had to start thinking about. And so it took a long time to go through the agreement. And I think part of it was just kind of ironing out, you know, being one of the first, besides, you know, a few of the other organizations that Vanessa had worked with. We had a very in-depth IT security audit. We actually, our IT director met with their chief information officer and some other key employees at NSC, went to their site. He did an on-site visit where he toured the facility. They went through all of their policies and procedures. It was actually one of the best IT audits that we've ever completed because we do these regularly with our vendors. And so with that, he came back, we worked with the attorneys, and of course that, you know, takes forever. And then COVID hit. So we had a lot of things stacked up against us when it came to the time frame. But with that said, we finally got there, and we had to change a few things. Like I said, we started including more information on the application data, which was optional, but the privacy, we had to then create a new privacy policy. And so the way that we were able to do this is by stating when you become a credential holder, so you apply, you're attesting to a few things. One, our code of ethics. Two, how your data will be shared. And so we list all of that out up front. We list that data could be used at our discretion for research purposes. And so all of that, by signing up, that's what you're attesting to. Now, there is an option if you choose you do not want your data shared at any point in time, you can opt out of that. And then what we do is we let NSC know that record is pulled. So if they have that contact data, we'll pull it, and they verified and attest to that's no longer there, and we pull it from our files that we transfer. We also had to set up, and I believe it's an FTP, a secure FTP site, where we put the data in and transfer over, and then vice versa, they'll send it back to us. And I say that because we just have finished the process of getting all of the data and fields refined to get it to NSC through that process. Any type of data migration. For those of you that have, I know we had the presentations on candidate management systems, and there's always a process with data conversion and how you link data together. So that took some time, but we're there now. So we have that. We decided as an organization, we'd go 5 years back. So all of the candidates who've achieved certification within the last 5 years will be transferred over, unless they opted out, to NSC. And those are active credential holders. So they have to have achieved credentials within the last 5 years. We do not give out any exam data other than pass. So that means they're active. We give them the date that they became active, what credential it is. And so that was something else that NSC had to do, is make sure they had the proper fields too for the data that we had to share. And we have some that have multiple credentials. They'll take that data and then monthly send us data back on our candidates. You know, what's the educational history. For the census data, that'll all be the aggregate data that Vanessa presented. So that's where we're at in the process. Kind of a quick snapshot of what we had to do to get to the point to where we have a signed agreement, and we've begun the process of figuring out the data fields and getting the information transferred. So those are all really big steps that we're excited about. And now we'll go to the next phase that I don't have much to report on yet, although the slides are very exciting because that's the type of information that we're going to see and be able to make decisions on. The demographic data, I mean, has been huge. We've, as an organization, just been looking at that in general. And we're looking at, you know, the Hispanic population is going to continue to grow. And, you know, there's also barriers to access, right? So as a foundation, that's something else that we're spending time on researching. And so this data is going to help us make decisions. Where do we need to provide more outreach? Where is there more opportunity? Where do we find that trajectory between with Vanessa's information? Not only will it tell us if they've achieved a degree, but if they've completed courses and maybe have never finished that degree. Is there an opportunity for us to help them in the professional development on that pathway? So there's a lot we can do individually for our candidates to support them, but holistically as an organization, helping the profession overall, because we'll have a better understanding of who our market is, or potential markets, based on the data that is shared.
Great, thanks, Christy. And we'll certainly get back. I'm sure there are a lot of questions for you and what you have addressed. We're going to turn this over to Holly. Holly, would you like me to bring up the slide deck, or would you prefer to do it yourself?
I always need tech help.
Okay.
So thanks, everybody. And just listening to the heavy lift that's been going on among both the certification organizations that have been involved in these discussions, the Clearinghouse and WorkCred, has just been truly amazing. So what I want to do is go a little broader and talk about trends. Thank you. Kind of looking back, looking forward, and back isn't so long. We're talking about 4 or 5 years back, and looking forward never makes too much sense to go too much forward, but maybe another 3 to 5 years forward. So the work that we've just heard about began, say, 4 or 5 years ago, when a focus on non-degree credentials, including industry awarded credentials, was really starting to burgeon. We didn't really have good data on non-degree credentials then, but we had anecdotes that we tried to share with audiences about what we were concerned about. And when I say we, I'm speaking particularly from my vantage point at Lumina Foundation then, where I was a strategy director, and I was the program officer for several of these projects. And actually I have probably a confession disclosure, and that we weren't supposed to play favorites among our grantees, but frankly, this work I rated it in the top 5 of all the work that we were doing, because I thought it was so important to try to bring industry certifications into a more common world where we could understand the array of credentials that we were beginning to witness. And I feel like this work is just really, really important. So I want to do remind us of Karen's quote that there is no complete centralized source of data on the outcomes or impact of certifications. While there have been isolated efforts to collect this data by some of the states, as well as self-reported data from certification bodies, the outcomes data are fragmented and incomplete. And that was then, and unfortunately it's still now. And whether or not this is going to be 5 years from now, we don't know. So in several years ago at Lumina Foundation, we were trying to understand and communicate the serious complications of non-degree credentialing. So we commissioned then 2 cartoons. I like to take difficult topics and try to simplify them if possible. And we thought at the time that they might just have a short life, a short shelf life. And but still 5 years later, unfortunately, they're still ringing true. So maybe if you could change the slide. Karen's gonna, yeah. Okay, here's the first cartoon. I call this playing credential poker. This is not a game that I think we should be playing, to be truthful. But the bottom line here is the dilemma that we don't have good data to tell us who's holding the best hand. And many of us would argue that this playing credential poker is getting worse, not better. And it's particularly difficult for students to understand with taking on debt loads and taking on the time it takes to credential. Where do they put their time and their money, and what are employers going to do also in trying to understand what they're bringing to the table? So next slide. So this is the other side of credentialing that some of you have already mentioned, and that is the value question. In the credentialing world, what is the combination of credentials? What are they worth? And that's one of the things that the National Student Clearinghouse is trying to help us understand by taking the data, if we can get the data, on all these different types of credentials that individuals are receiving, and then look at the value of. And although value can never fully be the wages you earn or the number of years of employment, it's one really good indicator. And particularly in the kind of economy we live in now, a lot of individuals want to know what is going to be the value of credentialing up. So next slide, which is really more trends. You've already heard about the Industry Credentials Initiative, and what I'd like to touch on a bit are some trends that we think we're seeing as we look forward. And the first is, we do think that many of the industry awarded certifications are really critical non-degree credentials in what we call our learn and work ecosystem. Maybe 100% of them are not, but we think a lot of them are. And we also think that they're going to grow even more important to be more important in the future, especially in certain industry sectors. And again, we have a lot of research questions. Which are the industry sectors that are most dependent on high quality industry certifications? Because individuals need to know this. And we don't have really good data on this. We also think that navigating the certification world is going to be more and more confusing for students. And that's that cartoon, frankly, of playing poker. We think it's getting worse right now, not better, particularly as Credential Engine, as Karen mentioned at the beginning, puts out those reports so far every year on what is the number of credentials in the US, and we're close to 1 million now, and it's been growing rapidly. And that's probably a conservative research study that they do on the range of credentials. And with that many credentials, again, that means navigating the world is going to be more and more confusing. We also think that there are going to be more attempts to embed industry certifications into traditional degree and certificate programs. And this, we think it's going to be happening more and more at both community colleges and universities. The universities have been a little late to join the discussion, frankly. I think the community colleges have understood the importance of industry certifications more easily and readily because of the kind of occupational programs they have tended to provide. But we think all the traditional providers are starting to realize that it may be very useful to try to embed industry certifications into traditional degree programs where it makes sense. So we think that there's probably going to be more of that, but there are big challenges that come with that. And that is really the reality that the certification providers typically operate separately from other credential providers. So college universities are one part of the ecosystem, and frankly, the industry associations that are you're in a different you're in a different part of the ecosystem. And then I would say at Lumina Foundation, we would have discussions saying, is it possible we could all get together and we could share data, particularly with technology offering more interoperable data approaches? And could we find databases that would let us happen? And what would be good about it, but what would be the negatives? Because there really may be some negatives about that, particularly protecting privacy rights and stuff. And that's what the discussions, particularly that WorkCred has been leading, have been trying to explore. What are the pros and cons of this? And can we deal with it with the interest of trying to reduce those navigation challenges and answer a lot of the research questions that increasingly we're all having around credentialing and the meaning of various credentials. So here's the key questions. And then in our breakout group earlier, one of the folks said, we're not sure what the best research questions are. I heard something like that. So here we don't know how many certifications there are. So the question would be, how many different kinds of industry certifications are there in what industries? We don't know how or if they combine with other credentials. We don't know whether they're more valuable in combo with other credentials. The data that Vanessa shared seems to show that they are, and we need better data from more certification bodies to answer that question well. We don't know who uses their certification to seek employment or does not once they receive certifications. And again, the work at the clearinghouse is beginning to identify that and send us some clues that some pretty yellow flags, maybe you'd call them red flags, that we really ought to be looking at that. We don't know who receives these industry certifications by gender, by age, by race, ethnicity, by industry sector. And we need to know this better to understand who might be being left out of really good jobs or the market and who is not. And we feel like we need to have that data. The good news is there are many advances in technology, like opening up the ability to have interoperable databases. So can we intentionally better share our data to understand the role of certifications and preparing people for our workforce? We think there is a trend among some industry certification bodies to answer this question with a yes, or with just maybe a strong maybe. and that's all good, because we all have different reasons for wanting to consider sharing our data. And this is why the discussion, we think, needs to continue and expand so that more and more folks can decide what's going to work best, with the notion that we could really try to understand our credentialing system better in the US. So we need all these kind of answers. Not only students do, but employers and policymakers do too, who are making investments in these kind of programs. So the last slide is more an exhortation. I say to myself a lot, which is, am I going to be showing these cartoons 5 years from now that we developed 5 years ago? Oh my gosh, I hope not. We could not understand the value of our various credentials individually, or the value that they may contend through the combo effects with other kinds of credentials 5 years ago. I don't think we can do it now very well. And the question is, what's going to happen 5 years from now? And when I think about my son's own attempt to move through credentialing, and he's had experiences with non-degree credentials and credentials all the way through in healthcare, my sense is, I don't want him to play credential poker. I don't want anybody I know to play credential poker. And I would just leave that as an issue for us all to talk about. So thank you again for today's conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of your questions and open the discussion.
Great. We're going to open it up now for a Q&A. Before we get there, and I would ask you if you could please enter your question into the chat. That would be great. And then we can get those questions moving. I'd also just like to put in a plug for something else that Lumina Foundation was so generous to support, and that's some work with the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce and the George Washington Institute of Public Policy. And just for your information, we'll be releasing a series of reports later this fall, which kind of goes to Holly's questions about what research questions do we have and do we not know. And we're putting some research reports out on labor market value of certifications, recertification, career pathways, and quality assurance. And we did that based on 17 in-depth studies of different certifications, some of whom the certification bodies are on this call. But I would echo Holly's comments that we ran into a lot of challenges due to the lack of data, quite frankly, that we just didn't have the data to be able to make decisions that were based in evidence. So we welcome your participation in trying to help us get to a point where we don't have to see Holly's cartoons in 5 more years. She will have developed new cartoons for us to ponder. One question that came in from Steve Garner was about where does personally identifiable information, privacy concerns arise from sharing sensitive data with other organizations. So Vanessa, Christy, maybe you might want to take that on.
Yeah, I'll just start from the clearinghouse's perspective and then have Christy weigh in. So the clearinghouse is under FERPA. The credentialing organizations are not, and that's why there's different concerns that they have related to accreditation and their privacy. Things like GDPR, the California privacy that everyone's trying to make sure they're in alignment with. We are agents of our educational institutions under FERPA. So we follow FERPA guidelines. And if any individual student blocks a record, it's not shared for other purposes beyond, we have a compliance reporting function that we are allowed to share information. And the information that we share with the Census Bureau is directory information under FERPA. So we are staying in very conservative space in how we share data, but giving them enough information to be able to produce the aggregate labor market outcomes. Christy, you want to weigh in on that too?
Sure. Right. That was a big concern of ours, is the data, right, and PII. So one of the things that we looked to was NSC conforming to the standard, the 27001 standard. And they are, so thankfully. But with our accreditation body, ANSI, if you're accredited through, or ANAB now, or NCCA as well, is that we have to just make sure that we have our policies and procedures in place. So they don't, you've probably heard this before, they don't prescribe what you need to do, but we need to figure out what that policy is and how we, mitigate any risk. And so what we did is we went through what information is being shared, and we didn't have everything. We decided to collect more. And one way to do that is with surveys as well, or automatic pop-ups. So when people link in, we're asking them to provide additional data. So that's one way we were able to collect more that we didn't already have. And it's always good, I think, to be transparent and say why you're collecting it. Ultimately, this helps everybody in the field. And we're fortunate enough that a lot of people find our credentials very valuable to their career, and they're very proud of them and want to help. And that's probably the case for everybody. But a lot of times they do want to help. So that's good. So with that, I'm losing my train of thought here. Let me get back. With the data privacy, we put policies and procedures in place. We, again, did that audit, and the risks associated with that, we just have to identify what we would do in case of, X, Y, or Z. Again, like a breach, or if somebody doesn't want to share data, we're able to have them opt out. So was that answering the question, or did you ask something? I kind of got off on a tangent.
And Vanessa or Christy, can you talk a little bit too about the data audit and what's available to certification bodies if they want to come and learn from the clearinghouse about what's happening with their data and what type of protections the clearinghouse uses?
Yeah, so we can talk about the fact, so the clearinghouse, as Christy mentioned earlier, they did an audit of our IT policies and procedures, and their IT director had a meeting with John Ramsey, who is our Chief Information Security Officer. And obviously we're still not back in the office, but regardless, we can have that kind of audit online, meeting with John. I'm happy to do that. As she said, as Christy said, it was her best IT audit, which I do have to share with John, because I'm sure he'll be very, very happy to hear that. But yeah, we're definitely happy to do that with any credentialing organization so that you can understand. We've been in this business for a long time. The clearinghouse has been around since 1993, and we've been protecting the data of our institutions since that time. So we have a very extensive, and I also have a FAQ, which I'm happy to share with anybody above and beyond the audit. We have extensive privacy and policy programs. We go through training. Every single person that works in the organization goes through training every year that's developed by our information security and legal department. So we take it very seriously. It is the one thing that keeps our CEO up at night, as I'm sure it does any CEO who manages data as an enterprise asset in the basis of what they do.
Christy, can you talk a little bit? I mean, you know, it seems to me there's been a change, right? First of all, it's like, don't collect any data because we want to be really conscientious of privacy. And now we're having kind of a 180-degree shift where we're saying we actually want you to collect data and lots of it, and we want you to share it. What are the risks that you thought potentially existed by sharing data with the National Student Clearinghouse? And how did you overcome those risks or apprehensions that you might have initially had?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, again, I would say one of the main things I've seen change is just being extremely transparent, because you give people options. And so it's not saying that you have to participate, whether people read or not and check that box might be a different story. But it's there, the attorneys looked at it. We understand what security measures are in place, encrypted information. So we know how things are being transferred, and we're very comfortable with that. And it took a long time to identify all of the policies. Again, we had an IT attorney look at that. We worked with NSC, and we both had to come away with an understanding of, okay, there are potential for risks. And we do have insurance for that. And we have a policy of what do we do when a risk is identified. And there's a timeline that goes with that. So that was some of the challenges. But to be honest, I think when we're open in what we're doing with data and ultimately showing the value that it brings, more people are open to sharing it. We keep everything private about the credential holder before they're credentialed. So nobody's going to know that they've applied for a credential or not. We don't share that information. And we, again, don't share any type of exam results. So no one's going to know your score. No one's going to know if you failed the exam, prior to. We kept it that way because on our directory, and part of accreditation standards is when you have an active credential, we make it public knowledge. So your name and credential, if it's active, is public. So that information sharing, there was really no concerns. But we do want to keep anything else personal about how the credential was achieved. We decided that's not something that we would share. And I don't even think with accreditation standards, that's something we could share. I don't recall for sure, but we wouldn't do that anyhow.
And Holly, I know, people get very comfortable doing things the way they've always done things, right? And so some certification bodies on the call, on the video, may feel that their current processes are working quite well for them, and maybe there's no need to change and participate in an activity like this. What do you think are the reasons that they might consider changing their practices?
Well, I'll reflect a little bit about what we heard in our breakout room, is that technology there are a lot of disadvantages with technology that I think we all know about, but there are a lot of advantages that we didn't have in the past. So we can link databases, we can ask the kind of questions that we've probably always had, but now we have the possibility of answers. So I would argue that in the confusing and chaotic credentialing world that we're living in, that we owe students, we owe learners who are taking your exams some answers. And that Chrissy just mentioned transparency. Well, if you kind of shroud your exam data and your outcomes and the value of your certifications, maybe it make it knowable or unknown, it just raises lots of questions that probably would be better made more apparent to students, learners, and to employers also. So, I would argue that that was then and that was fine then, but it's now, this is now, and that we need to think ahead and we need to provide better information, particularly to help people navigate this very confusing system that we're in, where they're likely going to be changing professions. They might be making horizontal or lateral moves across different industry sectors. They need to bring along their industry certifications along with their degrees and their certificates, credit or non-credit, and their licenses and their micro-credentials, and the badges, and that they're probably going to be carrying them in what folks are calling electronic wallet. The college university is not going to be the only one to hold that information anymore. They're going to take it with them like their health records to some extent, although that could probably work better for most of us. But that probably is the future. And the more we can get into the future to help people and prepare ourselves, particularly just by collecting some of the data that Christy indicated she's starting to collect, so that it can be matched up with this incredible goldmine of data that the National Clearinghouse has really in a pretty short amount of time has been to have 95% of the degree certificate information in the nation in one place, with the ability to connect it, let's say, to apprenticeship information or to industry certifications, or it's maybe some point to badging. That would be a phenomenal system if we could ever get there. So I guess I would argue for thinking about our students and employers, and I'm increasingly hard pressed to think about reasons not to. So that's and I realize easy for me to talk because I don't have to deal with the difficult issues that you're all dealing with. But I mean, that would be my best answer.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in here as well. I mean, just like many of the institutions that we work with, people always worry about what is the data going to show. But at the end of the day, it is an opportunity for improvement, right? Part of the reason we share data on institutional trends and enrollment trends, it's an opportunity to improve those programs, because I think we all want to help students. And as Holly and others said, we're in this lifelong learning world now, which it's not you go and you get a 4-year degree and you're done. I had a long certification program about 18 months ago that I finished because I realized I need to keep my skills fresh as well. So helping students understand that data and these pathways when there's so many programs being created every day, I think is hugely important. We want to deal with the debt problem, and the only way to deal with that is to get better information in the hands of students as they're making their career pathway decisions.
And Vanessa, do you want to talk a little bit? I see Linda Steedman put some information in on the T3 individual learning record, and the National Student Clearinghouse is part of those conversations as well, right? I want to make sure that people understand that while there may be multiple efforts, many of those efforts are actually related and complementary, and hopefully we're not all working in silos.
That's very true. We are part of the T3 network, the clearinghouse. As Holly was talking about those wallets, we are working on wallets and blockchain and all sorts of fun technology around creating interoperable learning records. And we're actually a member of, you'll hear the Velocity Network Foundation is a similar organization that is trying to move things forward, particularly on the employer side. I think there's a lot for us to learn about employers and how they're using credentials to be able to understand the skills that individuals are trying to signal. So we've created something called My Hub, which is our student portal, and we are creating the wallet capability there. We're doing some things. Some people may have heard about the Indiana Achievement Wallet project. That is a big grant-funded project that's working with Western Governors and IBM and the Clearinghouse and the Goodwill Center in Indiana to provide those kind of credentials in a student wallet and have them be connected to employers. So yes, we are involved in that. Lots of big efforts going on, but that is a great network to get involved in to learn a little bit more about the individual learning record.
And I think one of the things we want to emphasize is we want the certification bodies to become more engaged in this opportunity. Right? So all of these initiatives, we want your input, because I think one of the concerns that we have at WorkCred is that sometimes the certification bodies are left out of these conversations and are not part of the conversations at the beginning. And it's no fun to be invited to the conversation after it's halfway through, right? Because a lot of decisions have been made, which may or may not be relevant to the work that you do, or you may have some really insightful thoughts that would change the direction of the work and would make things much more comprehensive. Carolyn Delutri has a question in the chat. She didn't want to miss this opportunity to ask if anyone has experience about approaching colleges and universities to embed your certification program into their programs. Please reach out to her. I know I will start to say again, thanks to Lumina. Holly was great when Holly was at Lumina. She had all kinds of good forward thoughts, but we did some project on embedding certifications into baccalaureate degrees, because as Holly said, the universities have been a little slower on the uptake versus community colleges. And so we do have some examples in manufacturing at Ohio University where they've embedded a manufacturing certification into their engineering technology as well. And West Virginia University has done that with some of their health programs, health and wellness programs. So I can put in the chat as well when Biana starts talking, a link to a report that has several pages of examples that we'd be happy to share with you. But if there are other folks who also have done that, I would say we are also, for those of you that may be interested in that, WorkCred is working on some grant proposals currently to embed certifications into community college programs. And if your certification would be appropriate for that, we would love to hear from you as we work through the proposal process, and then with community colleges to determine where their interests lie. And also if you're interested in four-year institutions as well, we would like to hear from you because we're still working on some proposals for that. We do believe this is a good strategy for certifications. And just for those of you who are not familiar with Texas Southernmost University, which is in Brownsville, Texas, has a very large workforce program where they're very committed to getting students ready for jobs. Last year, they embedded 32 certifications into their programs. This year, they are increasing that to 62. So we can see that, and they have some amazing data as well. So, so that would be a really good opportunity. Just before we turn it over to Biana, I just wanted to ask all the panelists if there's one key takeaway that you would offer the certification bodies. Holly, we'll start with you.
I would just say that the certification bodies, you're all sitting on very, very important data, doing really, really important work, and more people outside of your area need to understand the importance of and what you're doing. And I actually think the higher ed system could be really improved by working together.
Tessa?
I think there's a great opportunity, as Holly said about higher ed, to forge closer relationships with the certification community and higher education. That's why I think it's also an additional value of sharing this data. I've had many discussions with departments of education and our other institutions that are really want to understand certification attainments of their students. They want to help, and they want to help promote certifications of quality.
Christy.
I just jotted a few things down as people were talking, but I think one of the key takeaways is understanding the worth of certifications and helping. You talked about having a seat at the table, right? Helping policymakers really have a clear picture of what certification is and what those outcomes are. And when it comes to sharing the data and, maybe you possibly find out something that you didn't want to know, right? It still gives you the opportunity then, because who wants to have a credential that the outcomes don't look good, right? I mean, hopefully that would never be found, but you'd want to know if that was the case. So you could improve. So I think it's a win-win. I can't find a reason not to do it. If you can jump over the hurdle of privacy and get your policies in place, I think that it's only going to help the entire credential industry. And in doing that, it helps the whole population as they're moving into their careers. And we can determine then what do we need to do as a credentialing body to help move those people forward. So I think that's why it's so important. That would be my key takeaway, is it really is going to provide a clear picture with the facts and evidence in order for us to make progress.
Great, thank you so much. All right, now I'm going to turn it back over to Vaina.
All right, thank you so much, Karen, for moderating, and thank you so much to our panelists. If you find that you have additional questions for them, you can see their contact information and you can go ahead and reach out to them. At this time, I would like to open up the floor to anyone who may have any announcements. You can take yourself off of mute if you have any job openings, any events coming up that you would like to share with the membership. Going once, going twice.
This is Tara Myers with ANCC. We have some job openings, and they're not in management right now, but we're looking for an assessment development scientist who would help with our role delineation studies, item development, standard settings, a research associate, a quality and program analyst. We've got quite a few. So if you know of anybody who's looking for something, please reach out to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other announcements? All righty. Well, as we wrap it up, I do want to let you know about our next CNG meeting. It will be in either November or December. We're kind of working around CNG, DC, and the holidays as well. So we will have an exact date for you soon. It will be posted on the website as well as sent via email. We may not know the date of our next session, but we do know the topic, a theoretical framework for determining whether a micro-credential should be developed. Definitely a topic that will generate a lot of conversation. So we do hope you are able to join us. Make sure to keep an eye out for that registration information in the coming weeks. So thank you again to our panelists, to our sponsors, and to all of you for participating in this wonderful event. We will make this session recording available. If you have any questions or suggestions for future sessions, please reach out to us at CNG. And everyone have a wonderful day.
Brianna, if I may, I apologize, it took me a minute to get off of mute.
No problem.
The National Roofing Contractors Association does have an open position right now, which is being posted on the ICE website and other job boards for a subject matter expert in the certification development department. So please watch for that, or if anyone has any questions about it, they can contact me directly. So.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.